Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Elsie Ko. We're here again with our interview series, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Rina Sanghavi here with me today. Hi, Rina.
Hi, Elsie. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you. We have a great story to tell you about her. Dr. Rina Sanghavi, she's the president-elect of the Medical Executive Committee at Children's Health System in Dallas. She's also the director of the Office of Faculty Engagement and Development in the Department of Pediatrics at UT Southwestern. She's also the chair of the Pediatric Business and Strategy. And then she's also the director of the Neurogastroenterology. I don't know how you have time for all of that. How do you do that, Rina?
I think it's prioritizing, but delegating, a lot of delegating.
Okay, that's good. You're gonna have to tell us about that. But Rina, she has a story about coming from India and then going to New York and then going to Dallas, and she has this very interesting leadership journey that's very unique and a story behind it that I think applies to many of us here. So, Rina, could you tell us a little bit about your leadership journey with us?
Yeah, so my leadership journey started way back when I was a young girl in India, and I wanted to be a war journalist. That was not very palatable to my family. So I did
I
the
wonder
next
why.
so I
Okay.
did the next best thing, which was I became a doctor.
Okay.
And I was the only doctor. I still am the only doctor on both sides of my family.
Okay.
I came to New York after med school in India, mainly to learn a little bit more about how medicine is practiced in the US, and then came to Dallas to do my fellowship in pediatric GI. So, one of the things that struck me across the years was that pediatrics is a specialty that has a lot of women in it. And yet, somehow, the leaders within pediatrics, especially at that time, were mainly men. And it was almost
That's
to me
true.
like the men had a glass escalator. If you were a man in pediatrics, you were going to get to the top pretty quickly. And so that really had this sort of effect on me where I wanted to be a leader because I thought we could make a difference in the lives of other pediatricians and our patients. Now,
Right.
my big defining moment came about a year after I was offered an attending physician position in Dallas. And I was invited to be part of this leadership meeting that was related to a no compete clause for physicians at a different facility that they were opening. And I was very passionate about my point of view, passionate to the point where, and during the meeting, I started crying. And that's the biggest faux pas as you read through all the leadership sort of journals and stuff. You don't cry in a meeting, but I was bawling in tears, ugly crying to the
Oh
point where I had
boy.
to get up and leave the
Yeah.
meeting.
Yeah.
And for the next 10 years,
How,
Elsie,
how
that
did people
haunted me.
react? How did people react to that, Rena, when you were crying? Were
You
they
know, and I'm going to be honest, I don't recall objectively how they reacted, but in my
okay?
mind, I think I recall them all talking about me after I had left, maybe in hushed
Yeah.
whisper
So
tones.
you created, yes, we create these stories in our mind about what happened.
Right. So I clearly don't know what they said, but in my
Okay.
mind, every time I saw somebody who was at the meeting, I couldn't help but think, oh my God, they're talking about me and crying 10
Yes.
years ago.
Oh
So for
boy.
10 years, yeah, so for 10 years, I sort of dealt with that. I still had leadership aspirations, but in my mind, this one crying episode had been blown up to such a big monster that I didn't view myself as how can I go and ask for a leadership position?
Right.
The second thing I did was I kept my head down and I worked really hard, crossed my fingers, and hoped that they would notice what an amazing job I was doing. And then I would seethe internally when nobody noticed what a great job I was doing.
So you know
Um,
what? You bring up a great point, Rena, that I think many of us, and maybe all of us, and we might not admit it, but many of us have gone through, is that we do create stories in our mind, and sometimes we're our worst enemies. And for you to go 10 years pining away, wanting a leadership position, keeping your head down, and then at the same time keeping the story in your mind that probably was relived over and over and became amplified in your mind to a degree that like far surpassed what really took place, kind of held you back. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And for me, the eye-opening moment came when I did my MBA in healthcare leadership and administration. And as part of the MBA, we were all assigned a physician executive coach. And as I was talking through, about this sort of particular incident to the coach's words to me were, "You're your biggest enemy. If you know this is your big hurdle, you've got to face up to it." And so
Wow.
what I did is I went home that night and I sent an email to one of the leaders who was in that meeting and said, "I'd like to have a meeting with you to discuss leadership." And that's all I said. And Elsie, I didn't hear back for 24 hours. You can imagine the sort of anxiety and angst that was going through me for 24 hours.
Right.
And then I picked up the phone and I called the admin, the secretary for that leader, who immediately got me an appointment. And that's the other key point I'd like to tell women is don't be scared to pick up the phone and talk with the admins. Sometimes they can be your best friends. They can be the keys to open the doors that you've been wanting to open.
Absolutely. Admins should be, you need to be nice to everyone, but you need to be nice to the admin too, to get in the door.
Absolutely.
Yes. Good pearl. Good
So I
pearl.
had this meeting and I had 30 minutes and in 30 minutes I had to prove to this leader that I was not this person that he had thought I was for the last 10 years, or at least that I thought he thought I was for the last 10 years. So I practiced a whole lot about what I was going to say.
Okay.
And for me, that's key. I find it difficult to walk into a meeting and ad lib. I do need to practice a little bit.
Right.
When I went to the meeting, the first thing I did was apologize. I owned up to the crying. I did not make excuses for it. I could have had 1,000 different reasons. But then I did say at the end of that I apologize that I cried, but I am not that person who I was then. I'm different now. And if anything, the fact that I'm still here 10 years later and I've not left should tell you a lot about my grit and resilience.
Rina,
And
let
I'm
me ask
interested
you
in
this. How much did he remember of you crying?
I think very little. He did vaguely remember that I cried, but not to the extent and not to the details that I remember or I had recreated, sometimes falsely, in my head.
Such a good point. And I thank you for bringing this up and being vulnerable on camera to share with people exactly what we do to ourselves and compared to what other people perceive.
Yeah.
And he probably was so like vague in his mind, especially 10 years.
Right.
But the fact that you owned up to it is something that you're deciding for yourself within was probably more powerful than what you were delivering to him. Is that you were
Absolutely.
saying, okay, I'm done with that. I'm done with like torturing myself over this one incident, and I'm showing myself. But at the same time, you're owning up to it shows your leadership skills.
I
So
think,
then what happened after that?
and so I think after that, I told him I'm ready for leadership positions. And so I was offered a spot on a newly formed committee that was looking at compensation equity. So this is the other lesson I learned. I had a lot of well-meaning mentors who said, "Oh my God, I would never do this work unless I was paid a whole lot of money for it."
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one woman mentor who said, "Rina, this is like cashing in chips in the bank. You got to first bank those chips and then cash them in at a later time." And so I did that. I took the position and I did not ask for extra money or compensation. It was a lot of work. But I think at the end of the day, we produced a really good product. We analyzed compensation inequity. We had very concrete steps to fix it. And 2 years later, we've cut the deficit down to 50%. But that really opened a lot of doors for me because after that, I got offered this position of director of faculty engagement. I got elected president of the medical dental staff. And then I asked to be the chair of the Pediatric Business Strategy Group. And that ask was accepted because I had now a track record. So sometimes I did a little bit of unpaid work to build my track record.
Yes.
Then I could go and ask for money for a bigger position.
That's great. Yes, you need a track record. You can't just start and expect, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's very good. How much of your time is spent with admin versus doing clinical work now?
So now I do close to 45-50% of admin and the remaining time is clinical. I enjoy doing neurogastroenterology, which is dealing with teenagers with chronic abdominal pain, but I enjoy it.
Uh-huh.
So I doubt I'd ever give up clinical 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think in order to be a good physician leader, you've got to do some clinical so you keep a pulse on what's going on clinically. Um, but I'm enjoying this leadership journey.
Do you feel like you're busier than ever, or you feel fulfilled in what you're doing, or both?
I both. I am busier than ever, and leadership is a 24/7 position. But you've got to know when to shut it down and spend time with your family. But that does mean when my kids are in bed at night and my husband's asleep, I'll get up and I'll type out some emails. Uh, but I feel very fulfilled because I think I'm making a difference, not just in the lives of the 20 patients I see every day, but in the lives of the pediatricians as well as a bigger number of patients with good policies that we put into place.
So Rena, what would you tell your younger self if you went back in time 10 years? What would you tell your younger self, at the time when she was crying? Now that you know everything that you know.
Well, I would tell my younger self, don't wait 10 years, own up to it and go face it. I think I wasted really 10 years of my life. And
Yep.
I'd also have told myself, get a physician coach early on. I'll be honest with you, Elsie, I always thought, well, coaches are for the weak people. I got it. I know everything I need to know about myself and leadership. And boy, was I wrong. I really would have told myself, get a coach earlier on, because I think that coach helped me see a lot of my blind spots and really helped me elevate my leadership game much more than an MBA. What I got out of the MBA was nothing compared to what I got out from a coach.
Absolutely. You can have the highest degree with the best grade in whatever executive masters that you decide to do, but you may not have the leadership skills. And if you don't have the leadership skills, guess what? You just wasted $100,000 of your money plus. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So what kind of blind spots have you seen in other physicians as you've been leading the development of doctors?
You know, I think as physicians, most of us, LC, are so used to a top down approach. We're used to being, we're the physicians, we're going to make the decisions. And a lot of times it's in life and death situations, so it's appropriate. But when you then transition that leadership style to your everyday work, it's not very palatable to the rest of the team.
Excellent.
Um, and for me, I grew up in the big city of Mumbai, which is very similar to New York, which is very what we call cutthroat and no
Cutthroat.
nonsense.
Yep.
And when I came to Dallas, you know, the approach is very different. So my style was seen as aggressive, rude, condescending, but those were words I needed to hear from my coach, internalize, and then consciously make an effort to change to be more inclusive. So
Yep.
I think I have a more inclusive, softer style, and I've learned now that leadership is 360 degrees. You can lead your peers, you can lead from being below somebody, and you can have a top-down approach. But in each of these approaches, you've got to remember that you're like a fish in a fish tank. You know how when there's a fish in a fish tank, every little movement is magnified and somebody is watching it? That's exactly what leadership is about. And I think a lot of physicians don't realize that. They feel like I can behave, you know, in a different way in a clinical setting. I won't be like this in a leadership meeting, but it all is magnified and everybody's watching you at every time.
Right, right. I used to be that kind of leader too, and I used to think that, the nurses who are working under me need to just own up because, they're not going to survive in the hospital otherwise. And we're an outpatient surgical practice, and they're crying because of me. But listen, you got to own up, and you got to listen to me because I'm the doctor. But that's not how it works. Your employees will leave you. They don't want to work with you anymore, right? And
Right.
you got to learn to adapt your leadership style, especially now with COVID. And I feel like sometimes the top down is needed when you got to get something done, and the patient's like life is at stake, like you said. But
Right.
when it's relaxed, you gotta be inclusive. You gotta include everybody in the conversation, and not be that harsh leader that you know how to be because of
Exactly.
your training. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
one last thing is, how are you in your role as a business strategist, ensuring that there's equity in the workplace, based on gender, race, anything?
One of the big things that we've done is tell the leadership if there's any leadership position that's open, no matter how minor they think it is, to have an open call for applicants for that leadership position. And it's a little bit of a hard sell because then you've got to interview these applicants. But I think it does a couple of things. Number one, it allows different people to put their hat in the ring to say they're interested in leadership. Number two, a lot of times leaders have come back to me and said, I'm surprised. I didn't even think of so and so as a candidate for this position, but actually he or she would be perfect and not the person who I was thinking, the usual suspects. And then I'll coach these people and I tell them, always take the money. You're often offered protected time or the money. Time is never protected, and
Right.
that's, I think, that's a big mistake a lot of women, minorities make, is we take the protected time. A lot of other people take the money. Take the money. The time is always going to get protected in your own way.
Well, how do you know you're getting paid what you're supposed to get paid?
So you've got to do your research. So when I got offered this position, our physician leadership page on Facebook, I did ask anonymous questions there. Hey, in so-and-so role, or is anybody doing it? What are you being paid? Get your data from around the country. Number two is give them a 12 to 18 month plan. This is what I will deliver to you in the next 12 to 18 months. This is what people across the country are being paid for similar roles. So this is what I think I'm worth, and this is what I'm going to ask for. And I always ask for a little bit more, knowing they're going to negotiate down. But hey, if they don't negotiate down, it's a win-win for you.
So good, so good. I mean, that you made a very important point is you have to talk about what value you're going to bring to that person in this given period of time that's measurable, and that's why you're bringing value. And when you deliver like that, bam, your value goes up and you deserve it. So love that. It's part of negotiations. It's really, 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 really key. I love that. And Rina, can you tell us, what are your thoughts about having a MBA for physicians? Do you think that's a requirement for someone to be a leader to have an MBA?
That's a great question, Elsie. And I actually think no. I think an executive MBA is really poor return on investment. What I would tell women, especially, is look and see where you want to be 5, 7 years from now, even 10 years from now, and then see if you need an MBA to get there, or do you actually just need a leadership course to get there? And 9 out of 10 times, the answer is going to be, I need a leadership course. You really only need an MBA if you want to be a chief financial officer, because a lot of that financial jargon you're going to learn just being in leadership meetings.
Excellent.
The other thing I always tell women is don't get caught up with, I need to get an MBA from an Ivy League college, because a big part of an executive MBA is the Rolodex of contacts that you're going to make. So I got my MBA from a university in Texas that was affiliated with UT Southwestern. The beauty of that, though, was there were a lot of leaders from my institution that were part of that MBA program. And it was that networking and the Rolodex that made a big difference. So a lot of people say, I want a national leadership position, but you've got to start locally. Again, building your credibility locally. And you do that with these Rolodex of contacts. And you get that with doing a local leadership program. But I think, Elsie, you do a great leadership program. There are lots of other places that offer leadership programs. I think that's what you need to get to the next step of leadership, not necessarily an MBA.
That's so true. And I was shared with you before that when I went to the American College of Healthcare Executives meetings for physician leaders, the speaker basically said that he has a plethora of resumes of physician who has MBAs, JDs, MHAs, MHLs, and he cannot find a great physician leader. And I was offended at first when I heard that. I'm like, how could you not find a great physician leader? Then I remembered, my journey and my style of leadership and how I made my employees cry. And, leadership, like you said, is not the degree. it's your skills in communication, your ability to lead, your ability to have employees follow you, and your ability to help other people grow. You got to change your mindset from what you've learned in medical training to thinking of yourself in a different way. And I agree with you. Sometimes it requires a coach, and for me, it did. It required a coach as well. It's invaluable. So, so what are your plans for the future, Rena?
In the future, I'd like to be in the C-suite. So I do see myself being a CMO in the next 5 to 7 years, and eventually being one of the handful of women CEOs that are leading a hospital system 10, 15 years from now.
I love that. Rena, without a doubt, I see you as that person too. So kudos to you. If there are people out there who might want to get some clue and some tips from you, can they reach out to you, and what's the best way?
Absolutely. They can reach out to me, and my email is reenarani.sanghavi, and it's spelled with a second A, at utsouthwestern.edu. And Elsie, I think if you can put a little scroll or banner with it, it's
Oh,
a long
yes, absolutely. I will do that. Thank you so much, Rena. Thank you for having this conversation with me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, this is Dr. Elsie Coe with Lead Physician, the online program for physician leadership, which will be starting in August of this year. If you're interested, please reach out to me. Also, if you have a topic that you want people to hear about, I would love to hear from you. So please contact me. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.